Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Dan Proft, co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560 with Amy Jacobson, Monday to Friday, 5 to 9 a.m. And joining me on this edition is Illinois Opportunity Project co-founder Pat Hughes. And Pat, an eventful 4th of July weekend in Springfield as, thanks to surrender Republicans, Democrats were able to pass massive tax hikes with no spending reform. The tax hikes we've been talking about for months now, been threatening, looming for months, increase in the personal income tax by 32%, increase in the corporate income tax by 35%. 15 House Republicans voted for the tax hikes, almost a third of the caucus. And there's this, which should be an iconic picture now, of Steve Anderson, the Republican from Geneva, raising his hands in victory after that passed the House, while a befuddled Jim Durkin, the House Republican leader, in quotation marks, just stands there with his hands akimbo, arms akimbo, I should say, looking puzzled and befuddled. And then on the Senate side, you needed one Republican senator to flip so that they could provide cover to Tom Cullerton, who's a target Democrat in DuPage County, seat that should be Republican. And that senator was Dale Ryder. Dale Ryder flipped, Republican downstate. He flipped, voted for the tax hike, voted for the override of the governor's veto, and that gave Senate President John Cullerton the supermajority he needed. So Republicans providing the glide path for massive tax increases with no spending reform. What are we even doing here? And in addition to that, it's not just bad enough that you have these enemies inside our perimeter. Then you have to listen to the likes of a David Harris, a Republican from Arlington Heights, who's been there for 2 decades, say this on the House floor, the moral indignation he heaps on those opposed to raising taxes.
Let me tell you something very clearly. I was not elected as a state legislator to help preside over the financial destruction of this great state. I respect my colleagues who are voting no, but to me, enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he yelling at us, Dan? Do you know why? He's like Stephen A. Smith. He's yelling.
Because he's real angry about having to vote to raise taxes to avoid the financial destruction of the state or to hasten it.
It's to hasten it, Dan, because as the tax rate goes out, more and more businesses and people are going to flee. And I know you mentioned Ryder in the Senate. You know, those 15 squish Republicans in the House gave cover to 9 or 10 targets that we could pick up in this 2000 off-year election. Better chance for us to pick up seats in the off-year election. We did really well in the presidential, even with a bad top of the ticket in some places with Trump and in Kirk, the entire state. And they gave cover to Madigan's, targets, and Madigan got to keep them off. So it's a political disaster all the way around. And like you said, what is there to say at this point?
And it's suburban Democrats that shouldn't be in the General Assembly that are the ones who were provided the cover of which you speak. These are races that Republicans must win if they're ever going to be a majority again. And instead, what you had is cementing the minority, perhaps for another generation, depending on who draws the map after 20. The 15 Republicans, so we name names here. Steve Anderson, who served as the de facto governor during the past week while Governor Rauner abdicated, just standing on the sidelines waiting to see how it played out. Terry Bryant, John Cavaletto, C.D. Davidsmeyer, Mike Fortner, Noreen Hammond, Chad Hayes, who already announced he wouldn't seek re-election, nor should he, Sarah Jimenez, Charlie Meyer, Bill Mitchell, Reggie Phillips, who's also rumored to be retiring, Bob Pritchard, Dave Rice, Mike Eunice.
A lot of those people, Dan, are in Jim Durkin's leadership. Like, these are people that he has picked to be the leaders, and they've just abandoned his leadership and the governor and everything else.
In the Republican Party in Illinois, leadership is just a title. It is not a quality you're tasked to exhibit. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by State Representative Alan Skillicorn, a freshman Republican from East Dundee, was one of the Republicans who did speak out against the tax increase during floor debate. Remember, 2/3 of Republicans in the House did vote against it, and many spoke out eloquently against it, including Representative Skillicorn. Alan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to join you guys.
So how are things in the caucus these days? There seems to be a little internal dissension in the ranks.
Well, yeah, I mean, we usually just ignore what bad policy raising taxes are when we have one of the weakest economies in the Midwest. And then on top of that, not passing a single reform, just disgusting. And it's a betrayal to not just Republicans, but the taxpayers, both Republican and Democrat across the state. So it's significant. But then you've also got to look at the bigger picture is, how do we actually solve things now? Now we have a situation because we gave up the ghost at the first opportunity to pass a tax hike. We don't have any leverage for reforms now. And that was the whole talking point for the governor, Republican leadership. I mean, if you remember, they were all willing to compromise. I mean, Bill Brady put out that budget and with a tax hike in it, and he said, we want these 4 compromises. Now that this tax increase has gone through, Speaker Madigan has zero reason to negotiate. And that's really the big thing is that if you're going to fold at the poker table, at least you should get something. And it's the people of Illinois get the short end of this stick.
Hey, Alan, I have to ask you because I know that you fought very hard and won a competitive primary, and I know that because I was supportive of you and Dan was supportive of you. What is your view, I can tell you my view, on these 15 Republicans who voted for the tax hike without reform, then went on the floor and we all watched them, give their speeches quoting God knows who, John F. Kennedy and everybody else.
Mother Teresa,
right? David Harris screaming at everybody. What is your view on Leader Durkin and your just view personally as a member of the caucus about whether these people, if they're not going to retire, should be primaried by their leader, by their governor, by groups like us, and by people like you?
Well, that's got to obviously be an option. Rank and file. I mean, think of rank and file legislators are disappointed, but rank and file Republicans. I mean, the party is supposed to stand for something, right? And if we do not stand against tax hikes, if we do not stand for caving in to Speaker Madigan, if we don't stand for trying to get reforms, what do we really stand for? So there is a significance to this, and it's a significance that it was Republicans did this to their own governor and the people of Illinois. How do we become a majority party? Mathematically, that makes it tough because now we're protecting suburban Democrats, but also ideologically, how do we become a majority party if we don't stand for something significant and that matters?
Is it? I mean, I received a text from another legislator during the floor debate that Durkin had asked members of the caucus when you were caucusing, even if you were going to vote for the Madigan tax hikes, don't speak on the floor during debate in favor of them. And of course, then virtually everybody who voted for it proceeded to speak in favor of it on the House floor, completely ignoring Durkin, who apparently has no juice. Is it the combination of that large a defection and the just absolute lack of interest in anything Durkin has to say among a third of the caucus, does that signal time for a leadership change in the House like we got in the Senate?
Well, that's yet to be seen, but there's more significance there in what you're saying, because Speaker Madigan has, magnificently pushed this tax hike through, outmaneuvered the governor, but more powerful than that is that he destroyed the Republican caucus in this whole thing. Some of those people that voted for this tax hike that disobeyed, Minority Leader Durkin are also in leadership. So they're, Republican spokesmen in many committees. So if people like myself, who filed 40, 50 great reform bills want to get those bills through committee, they got to, work through the committee process. They got to use their Republican spokesman. All of a sudden, now those Republican spokesmen going to, help out these bills that are pushed through reform, are going to help out bills that save taxpayers money, are going to help the bills that actually can lower the tax burden. We have a situation now where, we're completely dysfunctional and we need to rebuild. I think that starts with the people, but it also starts with Representative McSweeney has already filed a bill to repeal this tax increase. Every Republican in the House and the Senate should sign on as a co-sponsor to that bill, and every Republican in the state of Illinois should ask his or her legislator to sign on as a co-sponsor of that bill.
Well, the latter is possible. The former clearly isn't at present. He is State Representative Alan Skillicorn, freshman Republican from East Dundee. Alan, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, guys.
Thanks. And Alan's talking about Durkin, Pat. The other interesting thing about that, so Madigan drops a budget on Durkin on Sunday. New budget, 638 pages, gives you 2 hours to read it and vote on it. Durkin, bewildered that this happened because he's only been there for 2 decades, and he's surprised that Madigan is going to play those games and pull those strings. I mean, to completely outgunned it in terms of strategy and feckless in terms of philosophy. So what is it exactly we have with the Republican Party in the state in its current constitution, at least at the leadership level?
Not very much, and it's time for new leadership.